Hi, this is Michael Adams for CEORoaster and Stock Telegraph. And after some time, I'm presenting another of our infamous CEORoaster webinars. This time I have Tim Coe here. He's from Entheon, trading at the CSE or on the CSE, and the trading symbol is ENBI. And for my German fellows, I will put the WKN number and the German symbol somewhere around this video or in the description text. But for now, hey, Tim, it's my pleasure to have you here in my show, and I'm looking forward to get a lot of insight from you because, to be frankly honest, I have no idea about psychedelics, right? So I learned my way into cannabis, which was kind of the flavor of the month like years ago, and now we are having a kind of a second wave, right? But I think that a lot of people are more familiar with cannabis than they are with psychedelics due to various reasons, which we hopefully dig in here. But again, my pleasure to have you here. And maybe to start off, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, no. So Timothy Coe, honored to be here, by the way. Thank you for hosting. My name is Timothy Coe. I'm CEO of Entheon Biomedical. Previous to this current undertaking, ran a technology company in the blockchain space. We were doing decentralized voting protocols on crowdfunding mechanisms using the Ethereum network. And prior to that, sort of all sorts of things, but among them being investor relations. So understand the markets as well as sort of new technological platforms and all the various implications that go into, working with radically new sort of technologies and in radically new spaces.
Okay, no, that's good. And that's probably a good base, because we are kind of touching a new industry, even if, as I understand it, these psychedelics are around for centuries and thousands of years already, and are used by humans. But give me, maybe to jump into the topic, what is kind of the main thing that you feel investors need to know about psychedelics?
There's a lot to find out, but I think at the core of the importance of psychedelics is that, I guess the promise of psychedelics is that it has the opportunity to radically disrupt how we as a society approach mental health. I think we've seen, decades of experience with regard to the traditional pharma approach, a molecule is a magic bullet, and that, something like an SSRI or a anxiolytic is supposed to like magically relieve you of a psychological disorder. But I think the impact that we've seen over the course of this observation of that experiment has been that, I think increasingly we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about mental health because the current conventional approaches to treating mental health simply don't work. And so psychedelics do have the opportunity to radically disrupt and create those really profound internal changes that are necessary for people to begin living well. Psychedelics can potentially be this thing that, doesn't require a person be on drugs for the rest of their lives to feel good. And so that's the business that we're conducting right now, is proving that out, that hypothesis is backed by a ton of literature, proving that out in a sort of regulatory model using clinical trials to show that psychedelics are both safe and effective and create these really profound changes.
Okay. And in my understanding, there's like a variety of applications based on the specific ingredients, for lack of a better term, right? And am I wrong if I state something like cannabis, if you put THC aside and just talk about CBD is more for the body, while what you said, psychedelics, is more for the mind or for is that right? Or
I think you're onto it. The psychedelics do operate on the 5-HT2A receptor, among other things, but that specific receptor set is responsible for, depression, mood. And so it is very much sort of tailor-made to interact with things that govern how we feel. So very much associated with the sort of psychological processes, but wrapped up in there is the emotional processes too. But I think you're right. CBD sort of deals with that cannabinoid system, whereas psychedelics do operate on what's classically sort of in control of, thoughts and feelings and emotions.
Okay. And what's the legal situation of using psychedelics? And let's only talk or focus on North America right now. Cannabis was just approved in another state for recreational usage. I think it was Arizona or something like that, right? So is the acceptance in the market or by the states or the governments, is that similar? Or because I think when, as you described, right, there's no real recreational use. It's all a medical application, which means that it has to be approved by the FDA, for example, in the United States. So it's kind of same, but different, or than cannabis.
Yeah, there are, I think societally, there's a growing push to have access to these medicines. But, as we saw in cannabis, it doesn't happen overnight. The reality is that it moves through this wave of decriminalization, legalization, or sorry, medical use, decriminalization, legalization. And right now, there's a big societal call for access to these medicines. But realistically, in terms of wide-scale availability, it is going region by region. I think we saw a lot of really encouraging pushes from places like, in different counties in California, as well as Washington, D.C., and places within Oregon. But really, yeah, what we're proposing to do isn't so much posited on the idea of, legalization. It is really, focused on using that regulatory pathway to create an approved drug that can then be prescribed. And so, that decriminalization conversation is a bellwether. It's an indicator that society is asking for these things. But really, the process that we're engaged in, we're trying to get a prescribable drug product, approved by the FDA eventually.
Okay, so it's more like a real pharma instead of some recreational thing, because a lot of people, when you bring up psychedelics, right, the one thing that comes to their mind is, especially if they have been in the Netherlands, is kind of magic mushrooms, right? So but we're talking about way more than magic mushrooms, right? Actually, magic mushrooms is actually a side effect that you don't want, because you want to develop a real pharmaceutical medicine and not something that might get people high. So is that true, right?
Yeah, I think so magic mushrooms are amazing. The health benefits exist, and it's a very cool experience. But the reality is, for the populations that we're focused on helping, these are people with absolutely life-threatening, sort of life-changing mental health conditions. And so, what we're proposing isn't just something that makes them have a cool experience, but is fit within a pretty rigorous therapeutic context. And so we are creating these sort of medical products for people with very important medical issues. And so I'm super happy that there's a push towards, consenting adults having access to the medicines that help them. But for us, because these are such serious conditions with such serious implications, we are proposing a traditional pharma approach to getting a drug approved, but fitting it within a larger therapeutic context where there's supportive therapies in anticipation of the drug experience, and then following the drug experience, there's support after to integrate the findings of that experience into their life.
Okay, and to me, this sounds like it's a way more scientific approach, than some of the cannabis companies. Like, hey, dude, let's smoke some pot type of things. So it's really scientific. So having the right team, and we're talking about that a little bit later, but having the right team in place and the right connections to pharma and FDA and legal is probably way more important. Okay, so that's pretty good. So I think, and I will come up with some other questions, hopefully, but let's dig into the presentation. And just quick information. So Entheon was just, I guess it was last week, was included in the North American Psychedelics Index. So congratulations to that.
Thank you.
So and this might be, the stock had a pretty good run over the last 1 or 2 weeks, right? We reached a new high in the stock price last week, I think on Friday or so. So that was kind of what brought my interest to the company. And now let's switch into the presentation. We see that all works. You can see the presentation?
I can, yes. Okay, so thank you. As you can see from this slide, we are Entheon Biomedical, if it's not obvious enough already. And what we're trying to do is create a new dimension in addiction treatment. So we really take that to heart. I think, as it stands right now, the expectations for people that suffer from addiction are very shockingly low. I think, when a person does sort of get diagnosed with addiction, often the families and even the individual are sort of relegated to a place of just, cold acceptance of the idea that, yeah, this could potentially be a life-ending thing, which was the case for me and my family. We lost my brother to drug addiction in March of 2019, and that happened over the course. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but it happened over the course of 20 years, and during that 20 years, we did feel entirely powerless. And as many times as we tried, getting him into all the appropriate treatment centers, ultimately nothing changed. And so what we're trying to do is invert the expectations, because right now the expectations are shockingly low. And so, yeah, I think it doesn't take a genius to see that the current treatments are not sufficient. I think, in Vancouver alone, we lose anywhere from 150 to 180 people per month due to drug overdoses. And given our small population, that's incredible. And yeah, across the board with regard to different addiction issues, the numbers and statistics are just too high every year. Without going to every detail, about 90,000 people every year die from alcoholism. And that's a very underreported number. I think there's a lot bigger number with regard to sort of compounding health factors, heart disease, liver issues that come. But in general, yeah, 14.4 million adults had alcohol use disorder. But only about 5% of those people actually receive treatment. And that's a theme that you'll see across all of these different specific molecules or specific substance use disorder issues. So opiates, only 10% of people that need treatment actually receive it. Currently, it's reported about 2.1 million Americans have an opioid use disorder. And globally, about 13.2 million suffer from addiction. And I think we really need to highlight that in that, I don't know what the situation is like in Germany, but across North America, sort of due to the pandemic, but also just due to a change in the drug markets, we're seeing an ever increasing move towards this drug called fentanyl that is super deadly. It is massively toxic, and it creates all sorts of havoc in that it's a lot more unpredictable than just traditional heroin. And so we're seeing, these people that are addicted to opiates are dying at a accelerated pace just because of, the availability of the drugs that are currently in the market. And of course, smoking is, a well-known feature of our society where, about 500,000 people die every year because of smoking. Success rates from things like the patches, gums, as well as other pharmaceutical interventions is just not enough. And so in general, we understand that there are about 21 million substance use disorder sufferers across the globe. Approximately only 10% of those people receive any type of treatment. And the reality is that the treatment types, whether it's residential treatment centers or medical interventions, the efficacy rates are somewhere in the 5 to 10% range. And even some of the tried and true treatment types like 12-step based or Alcoholics Anonymous, abstinence-based recovery rates are about 5%. And was the case with my family. Each therapy stay or treatment stay cost anywhere from about $10,000 to $30,000. And over the course of my brother's lifetime, he was in approximately 7 or 8 different treatment centers. And so the aggregate lifetime cost to arrive at not successful is pretty huge. And so, yeah, we really do need to work on something that drives at the core of those issues and doesn't just, slap on a Band-Aid. So, yeah, substance use disorder is a very complex issue. It isn't just about the removal of the drug. I think we see with 12-step based or abstinence-based recovery, a lot of people that get far away from the drug, except just the removal of the drug alone doesn't change the issue. Ultimately, the issues that substance use disorder sufferers face develop over time, and sometimes takes an entire lifetime in terms of getting to that place where the person, just by virtue of waking up, feels like they can't tolerate life. And so at the core of these substance use disorder issues is a complex mix of psychological and emotional needs. Which brings us to here, the default mode network. So, the default mode network in people that are not afflicted with drug addiction may govern, default mode network can just be thought of as the normal patterns of thinking that most people, develop over a lifetime. For you and me, it might result in, I wake up, I'm excited about certain things, I really hate my boss. I can't wait to get that first cup of coffee. Oh my God, traffic is going to be so brutal. and that's just the regular course of thought for most people. But with people that have substance use disorder issues that have developed over time, those feelings may not be useful to the person, but rather, they may wake up with a sense of shame. They may wake up with a sense of deep anxiety and a feeling of helplessness that they need to self-medicate. So the beliefs, values, ethics, reactions, and habits that for us might not affect us in highly drug addicted people have the potential to drive very detrimental behaviors. So what is DMT? DMT is the molecule that we're focusing on. It's a very powerful classic psychedelic. It's thought to be very safe in humans. It's manufactured by the human body. It's believed to be released by the pineal gland, and has been used in different therapeutic practices for centuries, if not millennia. And the really key characteristic of DMT is that, unlike other molecules like LSD and psilocybin, it is very short acting. And we'll get into why that's important later. So yeah, the mechanism of DMT, it's an endogenous DMT. It's endogenous, meaning the body produces it. So the body's very familiar with how to process it and metabolize it. And it binds primarily to the 5-HT2A receptors, the serotonin receptors in the mind. But it also binds to a number of other ones. And so the real important thing about what this molecule does is that, it creates a bunch of effects. Primarily, it's disruption of the default mode network. So, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So here's, further history lesson. Apologies if I'm going on about this, but
all good.
DMT is a safe and well-tolerated. It's a long history of use. It's traditionally used in something called ayahuasca. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know what ayahuasca is, but it's sort of become all the rage recently, where people will actually fly to South America to take part in traditional shamanic ceremonies where they drink a jungle brew that's made up of DMT as well as another molecule to prolong the duration of the DMT experience. And yeah, ayahuasca is used to treat all manner of diseases of despair and to help people to really reconsider their lives and make some transformations that are super useful to them. So again, more default mode network stuff, but yeah, DMT is almost purpose-built for the process of disrupting the default mode network. So, the default mode network that governs, how we think and react to life can be sort of thought of as that first picture on the top right, where the standard brain activity may result in pretty standard behaviors. So you wake up, you feel bad, you want to make yourself feel better, you go to drugs, and then you feel shame about it. DMT, when it's introduced to the body, really does recruit a whole bunch of different brain areas and disrupts that, the deep grooving of the patterns that are so entrenched in most people. And under the effects of DMT, sort of under brain imaging studies, we see that there's a lot more activation of different brain areas, allowing for new experiences, new thoughts, and new feelings, which is super important to disrupt sort of the permanence of deeply entrenched issues that substance use disorder sufferers face. So some little background on DMT. It does create these beautiful visuals. It's almost a dreamlike state, but also creates, outside of the visual component, a very wide range of emotions. And users will often feel intense emotions of joy, of sadness, of anger, things that have been suppressed for so long. And out of that, in experiencing those things, users do report having deep clarity and insight into what makes them tick, and they can reframe how they think about things. So DMT, like we said, it really does dismantle deeply held beliefs, and really does reorder our reactions to things. So, this is just a simple infographic showing that prior to DMT, a person may view something and have a negative response to it. DMT has upon its inclusion, can disrupt the brain in such a way that, when a person views a stimulus, rather than, having that negative reaction to it, they can just have a neutral or positive reaction to it. Yeah, and so the importance of DMT, and like I mentioned earlier, in that, due to the characteristic of it being short-acting and powerful as opposed to a long-acting molecule. So it really does boil down to this, so DMT does have a very rapid onset. And so, during that 6 to 8 hour psychedelic experience that's gotten from LSD or psilocybin, that is a very long time of engagement. There has to be, a physician and a nurse attending to that person. So scalability issues exist. Mm-hmm. And then within that long time of engagement, there are also safety issues that can come up. Though in the therapies, there's a lot of preparation and getting someone, properly contextualized and prepared for what is a very powerful experience, it can still be overwhelming in the intensity of the experience. And so with psilocybin or LSD, that person is locked in for about 6 to 8 hours. And I liken it to a solid state rocket or solid fuel rocket. Once you light the fuse, you're going for as long as it takes for the fuel to run out, during which time you can have, negative adverse reactions that you would need to abort. But there are no real interventions right now, except for, potentially tranquilizers and anxiolytics, or just waiting it out and going through a very difficult experience. DMT, on the other hand, because the active time of engagement is about 15 or 20 minutes, it could be brought on rapidly, but also the window of the experience can exist anywhere from 60 to 120 minutes. And during that time, if a person has a negative reaction, instead of having to wait that out, if it does become totally dire, you can simply turn down the dose or stop the dose altogether, and that person will return to functional baseline in about 10 or 15 minutes. And that avoids the issue of traumatizing the person or having a very difficult experience that is not therapeutically useful to them.
Okay, Tim, a quick question. Is this, is it a pill that the patient has to swallow, or is it an infusion or a needle, or how is what's going to happen?
Right. Really good question. So for that purpose of having very fine control, the mode of administration that we arrived on is intravenous infusion. So direct infusion into the person's veins. And there are ways to do that in such a way that's not intrusive or uncomfortable. But yeah, that is the way that gives us the most controllability in terms of, sort of adjusting the dose, stopping the dose entirely. If this were to be delivered orally, there's some metabolization issues that come up, but also you would lose that ability to finely control the dose.
Okay, got it.
So as important as the molecule is and the potential for creating these profound changes, I think the psychedelic industry and the sort of therapy conversation is very different to the traditional pharma approach, where a person could be depressed and they're intended to just take a drug every day. Really, the new paradigm that's existing with psychedelics is that we are proposing that psychedelics can be an almost one and done style treatment, where taking a more holistic approach, where therapies are done in preparation of the psychedelic event. The development of that client-physician relationship or client-therapist relationship, where over time the patient is prepared for the experience, they build intent and context, getting them ready to have this transformational experience. And so this is what we see here. The approach to DMT infusion and psychedelic therapy is a lot different in that there is this holistic approach. There's a sort of context building and intent building that gets them prepared for the DMT infusion. The DMT infusion happens where these profound reorderings of ideas happen. But then following the experience, there's an integration, based on that context and intent that was built. All those very profound, visions and realizations that happen really need to be reintegrated, so there is a comprehensive shift in how the person feels. And so this is a longer approach, but we do think it's a more robust approach with a higher likelihood of positive outcome.
Tim, sorry to interrupt you again. Maybe I just misunderstood it. So there's a lot of preparation, I understand it, and afterwards there's some things going on, but the application is only done once? Like one time?
Presumably, yeah. Presumably.
Oh. I thought you're replacing, and that was coming to mind, I thought you're replacing one addiction with a possible other. Like I used to smoke cigarettes, now I swallow mushroom pills, right? So, but that's not the case. It's a one-time, besides the preparation, everything, it's a one-time application of the DMT thing. And then if everything works out, I'm cured.
That is the hope. Yeah. And we've seen, and then so we've seen, so with, one of our advisors who is director of research at Johns Hopkins, he's seen a huge reduction in smoking as a result of one-time use of psilocybin within the larger therapeutic context. And so that is the really, high value promise of psychedelics, is that we're not proposing, replacing one addiction with another or a dependence with a dependence. What we're really talking about is creating a long-standing permanent change in core beliefs that will result in long-standing change in behavior. So the approach is, it takes a little longer, but we hope that the outcome lasts for a lifetime.
Wow, okay. That's something totally new to me. So I thought it's kind of different. No, that's really, I think, a great thing. And because you were talking about some of the addictions that can be treated, like alcohol and psychedelics and opiate, I can't pronounce it. But so how about addictions that are not coming from a substance, like you have whatever, gambling, porn, whatever? Can this, in my understanding, the DMT should also work with these type of addictions, right?
Absolutely. Okay. That's a very important point to bring up. Ultimately, the addiction to a specific substance isn't really based on the power of the substance. And all often, the reality is that someone that, may die due to an opiate overdose is often addicted to a multitude of things, whether it's stimulants like methamphetamines or cocaine or even alcoholism. There's polydrug users are a reality. And I think it makes up a large portion of drug users. The reality is that whatever the substance is, whether it's opiates, methamphetamine, alcohol, cocaine, crack cocaine, really what underpins that is that very important core set of issues. So ultimately, people are self-medicating, right? People are trying to medicate their way out of uncomfortable feelings and into a feeling of relief. And so, outside of substances, people will use social media to distract, people gamble, have sex addictions. Ultimately, what drives all those behaviors, and there's very, very many faces to that behavior, is a set of internal issues that we believe psychedelics can operate on. And so, some arguments are often made that, drug addiction is just one face of that internal issue set. And some people, rather than use drugs, will, often just be very depressed or have other sort of mental health issues. And so, DMT is potentially very useful in treating depression as well. And so ultimately, it is something that goes to the deep core of issues that a lot of different behaviors and mental health indications bleed out of.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Go ahead.
Cool. So, like we were mentioning, the distinction between recreational and traditional biotech is that we need to enter this into a regulatory conversation. In order to do so, we need to take the very rigorous approach of eventually submitting this to regulators like the FDA, Health Canada, and the EMA. And so in order to do that, we have a bunch of very important milestones that we have planned. We've agreement signed with CHDR, the Center for Human Drug Research, who will be conducting our human trial in late 2021. And we also have a very important distinction. DMT is sort of widely available. You can get it off your street dealer, but purity, especially if you're going to be giving it to humans, is super important, and regulators look at that. And so we've signed a GMP drug supply agreement with our manufacturing partner in Calgary. Their name is Psygen. And so combining that GMP drug supply with contract research organizations to fit into a regulatory conversation, so this could ultimately be eventually accepted by people like the FDA, EMA, and Health Canada.
Okay. Tim, is there already any psychedelic treatment or drug that has gotten FDA approval?
Yeah, good question. So ketamine, ketamine used to belong to this class of, Schedule 1 drugs. It was believed to have no therapeutic use, highly addictive. That was the threat, at least. That has been fully approved now. Esketamine, it's a variant of it, has been fully approved now and is now available for use in the treatment of depression. And so, yeah, we're seeing a massive reordering of belief, right? That legalization push, that decriminalization push, is indicative of the fact that I think society as well as regulators are beginning to look at these molecules and say, hey, maybe the assumptions that we had about the dangers versus the benefits of these things needs to be dramatically reviewed. And so outside of ketamine already being approved, you have companies like Compass Pathways that are in, phase 3 study of their drug candidate based on psilocybin, their psilocybin drug candidate. And so, we're seeing a big push towards further advancement. Great. And so like we talked about, our initial targeted indications are nicotine cessation, opioid use disorder, and alcoholism. But like you mentioned, a good question, we do see there being a huge application to addictions that maybe aren't based in substances. So yeah, behavioral addictions like food, gambling, and sex, as well as other, substance use disorders and mental illnesses such as depression.
Okay.
And so this is our general clinical trials timeline. We see this, the CRO human trial taking place in Q4 of this year. It's at the Center for Human Drug Research, a massively well-known leader in clinical trials. Following that, we intend to do a number of follow-up trials specifically suited or specifically directed at efficacy. So for our first trial is mostly based on safety. It's to get an understanding that the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, as well as toxicology are all established. And then from there, we see the application of that to a variety of use cases.
Tim, quick other question, because you said that this DMT is something which the human body is used to and is producing itself, right? So how is the IP? Like, how can you protect your product? Is there any kind of patent, or how does that work? Because if it's produced within my body, how can you have a patent on it?
No, sure. Really good question. And that is a question that faces the general psychedelic space in terms of, a lot of these molecules are otherwise known as generic. So they've existed for a while. They're really well understood. They've been researched. We have provisional patents in place for the specific use of it. So that outlines the specific way that it's delivered, the dose thresholds, and the specific use case with regard to nicotine addiction, opiate addiction, etc. Really, like, the IP will, so we have those specific use patents, but the IP will be additionally generated once we convert this to a technology. So ultimately, we are getting a sort of drug therapy approved, but in order to get this into the hands of physicians, we will need to convert this into a specific type of technology that really removes the barriers in terms of, how to administer this. So we're going to wrap this up into a pump technology that ultimately delivers the DMT in accordance with the approved sort of dose regime that we're conducting the clinical trials.
Okay.
So though our core aims are getting this drug approved, the specific sort of dosing regime approved, we understand it's very important for us to think about the larger patient journey. And so we've made some partnerships and acquisitions and investments that we believe will support not only our own clinical aims, but potentially create tools that will be useful not only to us, but potentially the entirety of the industry. So we'll go into those a little bit. The psychedelic patient journey is not an isolated event like we've talked about. It's a more holistic approach. It takes into consideration the preparation, the event, as well as the follow-up. So from physician assessment to the analysis of the psychedelic experience, Entheon, we're developing tools to support all stages of the patient journey. So this is more to do with our clinical trials aim, but Psygen is our drug supply partner. They're producing DMT for us, GMP standards. CHDR, Center for Human Drug Research, been involved in dozens, if not hundreds, of regulatory conversations. good record of translating their findings to full FDA approvals. But yeah, no, so we recently made an investment into Heading Health. Heading Health is a US-based ketamine clinic network. And so we understand that, of the molecules and business models that are available to us, ketamine, like we talked about, is an already approved drug model. And so we recently made an investment into them with a research carve-out that allows us to do research there. And so we're very eager to, dip our foot into that arena so that we can get some clinical learnings there, as well as to prove out some of the, some of the tools and technologies that we've recently acquired. And so, yeah, we're very excited to research some of our technologies in the context of ketamine, which we'll get into in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we recently partnered with Divergence Neurotech. Divergence Neurotech is focused on EEG data aggregation as well as data processing. And this is really important for us. Data is going to be a large part of Entheon Biomedical. We understand that in order to make really informed decisions, we need to take in as much relevant data as is available. And so Divergence Neurotech really does represent our ability to get deeper learnings from both the patient before their experience, during their experience, and after their experience. And so what we're working on with them is the development of a platform that will ultimately give early indicators of whether a patient is appropriate for receiving psychedelic treatment and get a better understanding of what that psychedelic experience is like. And then following the psychedelic experience, track how improvements are made and reported. And so, yeah, we're really excited to work with them to get us a better understanding of, what makes up the variances in patients so that doctors can be more informed in terms of prescribing, whether they administer ketamine, psilocybin, DMT, or MDMA. And so we're very excited to partner with them.
Okay. Tim, I can imagine that because you were talking about if it's appropriate for a specific patient to get treatment. So I can imagine that, especially if it's people that have a long-term addiction to some substance like nicotine, alcohol, they might have some serious physical problems, right? Like heart or lungs or liver or whatever those guys have, right? So this needs to be figured out probably during your testing phase, right? So if there's some interaction between that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's super important. And so additionally, I think there's, not all mental health diagnoses, not everyone that has depression is the same sort of depressed, and not everyone that is a substance use disorder sufferer is the same type of person. Really, there's a ton of variance within specific populations. And so, there's, built up cognitive effects over time, but as well as just different personality types. And so EEG is one of the most reliable and well understood ways of looking at these very unique variances within patients. And so based on those specific EEG signatures, you'll be able to get an understanding of whether that person is more depressed, has more impaired cognitive function. And from there, you can adjust, doctors can adjust what they prescribe as well as the ways that they deliver therapy, both in preparation and in the actual sort of selection of the molecules. And so, yeah, we do think that, because the psychedelic industry is so new, ultimately doctors will be faced with these very important decisions about what is the most safe thing to prescribe for a potential patient. And so, yeah, we're really excited to use EEG to better understand how to help doctors make those decisions.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we recently acquired Halogen Life Sciences. So Halogen Life Sciences is, we view it as being another very essential leg of this data stool that we're creating. Ultimately, in accordance with that idea of helping physicians make really informed choices, we understand that there are genetic variances in people that result in a whole number of things, ranging from likelihood of negative adverse reaction to psychedelics, as well as just propensity for mental health indications like psychosis or schizophrenia. And so Halogen really does enable, it does have a product in the very near term ready for commercial use. There's going to be an entire platform that takes into consideration a lot of things, sort of self-reported surveys and questionnaires, and then linking that to the genetics information so that, potential psychedelic users could have a better understanding what some of their own personal dangers are before they embark on something like a psilocybin trip. So that's one component, and that's going to be a pretty cost-effective screening tool to give individuals as well as physicians better certainty about what's safe or not for them. But we really do see the opportunity to expand out that data library so that upon the acquisition of that data, correlating that to the EEG to get a really robust understanding about genetics as well as phenotypic EEG data, and really using that as a predictive set of predictive tools, or you cross-reference propensities for negative adverse reactions as well as sort of unique brain signatures that are associated with genetics, and suddenly you have a pretty strong predictive tool that could understand to a higher degree of certainty than is available right now through self-reported survey what the likelihood of positive or negative reaction would be to psychedelics. And so Halogen is the first acquisition in that stream where ultimately we want to have a suite of tools that are easy, usable, and really sort of easy, ready to deploy for physicians, that when a new patient comes in, there's a technology as well as a test that they can employ, and the sort of turnaround on that is pretty soon, or pretty fast, so that they can, before they prescribe any sort of medication, they have a set of tools that they can use to determine if it's safe or not.
Okay.
Cool. So we're trying to take a patient-centric and personalized approach to psychedelic medicine. So like we mentioned in the preparation, developing clinical tools to optimize prescriptive decisions. So using genetic biomarkers and EEG biomarkers, indicating what's the appropriate course of action for a physician to take. And also during the experience, so intra-experience, using EEG, determining what the patient is actually going through, if they're in a good state, a bad state, or if, from a safety perspective, they're overactivated or underactivated, to really optimize that psychedelic session, as well as minimize the potentially traumatic effects of a negative experience. And then following therapy, using EEG to continually track the progress that is made, and to quantify the changes from pre-treatment to post-treatment. Okay. And so this is our team. There's my face, but also a bunch of other prettier faces than mine. Andrew Hegley is a very accomplished researcher. He's a professor at the University of British Columbia, and brings with him other members of the UBC pharmacology department. And he's heading our clinical development team. And vast experience in preclinical within biotech. Brandon Schwab has worked in a variety of industries and has done a very great job of sort of bringing us to where we are and managing the complexities of the various transactions that we've had. Yaron Eshel comes from the world of cannabis as well as wearables and prosthetics, has a ton of experience operating with regulators, introducing new technologies into a regulatory discussion. Christopher Gandhi is a very accomplished researcher, worked in pancreatic cancer, and has done a ton of research projects. And Ruth Chun is our board member, and she has been corporate counsel in the world of cannabis as well as a variety of other industries. And then going to our scientific advisory board, I think that's a very important thing to focus on. For the viewers that are aware of the psychedelic industry and the psychedelic research space, if you look at our board, it is comprised of some of the most accomplished names in the psychedelic research space. Matthew Johnson is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral science, and is director of the Johns Hopkins Psychedelic Research Center. Robin Card-Harris, also super accomplished researcher in psychedelic sciences at Imperial College of London, is a sort of European counterpart to Matthew Johnson. And they've both been instrumental in informing the molecule selection as well as the method of delivery. And so, we're super lucky to have them on board and have them sort of actively engaged in the protocol development. And then, of course, not to be forgotten, Dennis McKenna, Terence McKenna's brother, probably the oldest known, longest the most experienced researcher in the world of psychedelics, absolute authority on ayahuasca and DMT. Christopher Timmerman at Imperial College of London, operating under Robin Card-Harris, has done amazing research in DMT. And then Malin Utag, also from Imperial College of London, has done some really phenomenal work with 5-MeO-DMT. And then, of course, Kenneth Tupper and Michael Walker sort of filling that out.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And so these are just some basic financials about us. So at present, about 52 million shares outstanding, 55.6 million fully diluted. Current cash position is about 5.7 million. And yeah, as of recently, our average daily trading volume was about 700,000 per day.
Okay. Probably a little bit higher because of the last couple of days, right?
Yeah.
But
last couple of days.
No, really, that's very, very impressive. And it was, to be honest, it was a long stint or a long track, but very compressed information, but something which people have to probably, if they're not familiar with that space, have to review like 2 times or 3 times to really get their hands or heads around that. So I think we should definitely, so first of all, thank you very much for this, again, great presentation. I think we need to hook up again in maybe a couple of weeks, right, when there's some more news flow coming up, so that we can talk a little bit more about the company itself. You gave us a lot of information about the treatment and everything. But of course, there's always something like, hey, what's the share structure? Who is like big shareholder? But after now we're talking like for 45 minutes. I think it's for this run, it's all good. Just to finish up on my end, what is kind of the, let me just one thing. So this is, okay, this is for people that want to get in touch with the company. Go to entheonbiomedical.com. You can also contact the investor relations there. I've talked to them. They are pretty open and willing to discuss things with you. But now, just to sum, there we are again. To sum up, give us kind of an outlook about the next, or where's Entheon in, take a look at this crystal ball. Where's Entheon in the next 5 years? Is it still around being an independent company producing the DMT and other applications, or will it be bought out by one of the bigger pharma companies? And if so, what is the typical phase in the FDA process where companies get acquired? I doubt it's not phase 1, but it's also not phase 3. Right, so when is kind of a typical? First of all, is it kind of the end game to get acquired, or bring it into production? And if acquired, then what stage?
Totally, that's a possibility. That's certainly something that's been discussed. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is develop things where, independent of whether a pharma takes notice and potentially wants to acquire us, we do need to structure the clinical trials in such a way that's rigorous enough that if we want to take it to the full scope of completion, we can. But I do think pharma is going to become more and more interested ultimately in psychedelics because it is so disruptive. But yeah, 5 years from now, I would like to see our drug delivery technology in production and in clinics all across America and Europe and Canada, and so people utilizing not only our drug delivery technology and our DMT-based product, but physicians and therapists across the world using our EEG technology and our genetics tests to make those decisions about what molecules are using. And we want DMT to exist as a treatment option among the various other molecules. Okay,
great. So thank you very much. Just my 2 cents, right? As most of my viewers know, if there's something which is kind of a hot sector, you have everybody's just jumping on the same train, right? So they all want wannabes and Me Too's, and then you have like thousands of companies. It happened in the cannabis space. It happens always in the resource space. And it already started happening in the psychedelics space. So to me, it's very, very important for my audience to understand and figure out what are the real deals in this sector and which ones are just kind of trying to make use of the hype. My feeling is that I have found one, which is the real deal, and I will continue. As I said, we're going to hook up again in a couple of weeks or so, right? To give my viewers an update. In the meantime, I would urge my audience to at least take a look at the company, get in touch with the management. Of course, follow my stuff, because I'm constantly going to educate you about this. And so for all your endeavors, Tim, keep fingers crossed. Thank you very much. And we talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael.